Welcome back, everybody. Coast to Coast, This Week in America. Great to have you with us on the program today. Our guest is Dr. Frank Davis III, a retired general surgeon, received his AB in chemistry and MD in medicine from UNC Chapel Hill. He's a retired member of the American College of Surgeons, the Southeastern Surgical Association, and the American Association for the Surgery of Trauma. He was inspired to write the book, What's Your Analysis, Diagnosis, Truth or Fantasy, an Essay on Human Perception, because of his recognition that narcissism is both painful and self-defeating. The book is available at Doran's Bookstore. That link is on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Always a pleasure to have with us on the program Dr. Frank Davis III. Dr. Davis, welcome back on the program. Great to have you back with us.
Hey, Rick, good to see you.
It is
good to be back.
Yeah, it's fun to have you here. We always learn something, and this book is absolutely fascinating. And it's got a great book cover. If you go to doransbookstore.com, you'll be able to see the book cover. If you go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, you'll see the YouTube version of the show, and you'll be able to see the cover. The cover sort of says it all here. Explain exactly what the cover is, and then we'll get into the specific topic.
What's your analyst's diagnosis, truth or fantasy? An essay on human perception tries to convey the truth that human perception is actually caused by our parenting, the way Sigmund Freud said it was in his book on the his writings on the personality. So that perception is caused by our prejudices that we have from our parents before we even meet a subject that we're supposed to have an opinion on. We get those prejudices for that opinion from our parents and things that they believed, and therefore they taught us.
This is fascinating, and these are two great intellectual challenges that go back a number of years. Talk about the challenges that you faced in doing the research for the book, and then we'll talk about how you were able actually to come up with some answers, and it's the first time we've actually had really answers for these questions.
Well, I didn't actually state the second challenge, which was both Sigmund Freud, and Albert Einstein challenged the world in 1905, Freud, for us to solve the problem of the structural development of personality, and Freud predicted or knew that we would solve it using the narcissistic personality disorder as the fundamental research tool to find it, so that we would find the answer to the structural development of personality by understanding better narcissistic personalities specifically. And then the challenge of Einstein was that we would be able to write one equation that would equilibrate all three theories of physics, the magnetic, gravitational, and atomic theories of physics, would be unified by one equation. Now, first, to do this, you have to solve the question of personality, because since personality has so many prejudices, you might even assume that the reason mankind has not solved those problems of 1905 in such a long period of time is because we all have so many prejudices that prevent us from solving it. What I did was I psychoanalyzed the psychoanalysts and found that they, in their conscious minds, they believe very strongly in their conscious minds and the way they say it, that personality is not caused by genetics or the environment, but some relationship between the two. And they hold that stance very strongly. But if you read them deeply enough and be very critical of their words, you find that unconsciously according to Freudian techniques, they believe that the personality is caused by genetics.
Right.
And they write that way, and they will not accept articles that promote or suggest or even prove that personality is caused by Freud's other principle, which was the superego principle. Now, the superego is the value system of a human being. It is the parental representative of a human being in a human being's mind. So if your value system and your parental representative in your mind is your superego, and that is your parent, then your prejudices are caused by your superego or your parental representative in your mind, which is some identity of your parent that you have identified yourself with. So that when Freud went from the pleasure principle to the reality principle, what he was teaching in essence was that we go from a pleasure principle of behavior to a reality principle of behavior, and the reality principle is based upon the teachings of our parents, which are our superego figures. Now then, when you analyze these psychoanalysts and find out that in their conscious mind they're brilliant, like Thomas Kuhn says, the basic premise upon which science is based is the belief that scientists know what the world is all about. But don't you know, Rick, that that's a grandiose self-image? I mean, for me to think that I know what the world is all about when I haven't done any research or made any clear, in-depth observations,
Right.
how could I feel like I have feelings of entitlement to believe that I know what the world is all about if I haven't done research to test the world to see what it's all about?
The book is
Well,
called What's Your Analysis Diagnosis, Truth or Fantasy, an essay on human perception. Our guest on This Week in America is Dr. Frank Elbert Davis III, a frequent guest on the program. If you go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, to our YouTube channel and our iTunes channel, you can listen to past programs. It's interesting. I didn't mean to cut you off. I wanted to let people know the name of the book, and you break these concepts down where we can understand them in the book. When you go into doing analysis of psychoanalysis, what kind of response did you get? A willingness, an open mind to listen to what you're saying, or was there a resistance on their part?
I submitted articles to demonstrate knowledge that I had solved the structural development of personality to the International Journal of Psychoanalysis on 13 different occasions, and they were all rejected, and they were rejected mostly by the editor-in-chief then, who said in other articles that he rejected my articles using his favorite insult, which is to say that my articles were not even psychoanalysis, when my articles, many of them, were based on Freud's writings of the dissection of the personality and the personality structures, the superego and ego.
So you were not met with open arms. It wasn't like, this is interesting, let's talk about it. They basically shut the door on you.
They shut the door just as judges rule 87% of the times for maternal custody and child custody cases, and the white race treated the Negro race in the era before the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, where the black people were considered inferior simply by genetics. They treat you when you speak outside the paradigm that they know what their science is about, they completely try to ignore you. And they will accept no articles that suggest or write about personality as being a superego resultant structure. Whereas I have proven with Koch's postulates that all the criteria of the American Psychiatric Association's DSM-4 for the narcissistic personality are caused by the fantasy world views of those personalities. So that's how I know without a shadow of a doubt that I have solved that problem for Sigmund Freud. I also know by Freud's writings that psychoanalysis as it is today and as accepted for publication by people like Dr. Glenn Gabbard, it is a split knowing ego in the process of its defense. Now, another reason why I know that psychoanalysis is not true as it is today is they can't even get government funding for psychoanalytic treatment of patients in hospitals, so that the government doesn't recognize them as getting any results that are positive. Whereas in Freud's first 18 cases of hysteria, he got a positive result in every case. But by 1905, the narcissists with the fantasy world of unlimited brilliance had taken over psychoanalysis, and because the hysteric patient came on to them sexually and suggested that they desired them sexually, they said that it was genetic, not environmental. But the reason they couldn't see it as a transference was because they're so narcissistic, they couldn't substitute the patient's father or older brother for themselves as a case of transference in their relationships with these hysterical patients.
The book is What's Your Analyst Diagnosis, Truth or Fantasy, an essay on human perception. The book's available all across the country. We'll link you to DoranceBookstore.com at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. The author is the guest on This Week, Frank Elbert Davis III. Now the book is there. What kind of response are you getting from the book? Are you getting positive response that, like, yeah, this really makes some sense here?
Well, I am not getting as many readers as I would like. And of those that read it, it's about an equal response between the prejudice that personality is genetic and to me, the ones that have read some psychology and psychoanalysis from Freud, the idea that they agree with me on the superego structure. Now, more recently, Rick, I've gone into associations of these structures with biblical writings. And you know, the Bible says that manly scientists, will always be in their own confusion. And you hear a lot of preachers talk on the radio about how scientists are fooling themselves because their compass points to themselves instead of some absolute truth that is outside themselves, like true north. So the Bible talks about this as scientists confounding themselves with their own imaginings. So it's biblically true. My books are biblically true there, but they're also biblically true if you think about Freud's superego structure as being a person's soul. and a person's ego structure as being their externally perceived self.
Okay.
So that you see how Freud's writings, as he originally made them, were almost scripturally conceived, or certainly they're scripturally conceived before Freud even wrote about them, as the superego being the soul and the ego being the spirit of a person.
Time
More,
going. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
more and more, my works are coming to me as being supportive of biblical writings.
Time going by quickly. Our guest on the program is Dr. Frank Elbert Davis III. The book, What's Your Analysis Diagnosis? Truth or Fantasy, an essay on human perception. Information at dorantsbookstore.com. You can log on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. As people are listening, what are some of the practical applications of what you were able to come up with and from the book? How is this a benefit?
Well, if you're a person that wants to find truth
Right.
or truths, you need to realize that you cannot have the same belief in two different ways or as mirror images of itself and have truth. This is what Hegel called nothingness. In other words, Hegel wrote about the thesis and the antithesis. So if you have the thesis that the personality is environmental or parental, but not genetic, then you cannot at the same time hold the antithesis that the personality is genetic, because then you have nothingness. You have to break everything down into two directions or two things, one of which is true and one of which is not true, and then find out which one is true. Of course, scientists are all the time wanting to say, oh, that's too simplistic. But they're not realizing how far the subject has been broken down once you make that choice. And a source common to everybody on the internet now is Wikipedia. One of the most famous things they talk about is disambiguation. They want to define terms for us clearly enough that we understand what something is and what something is not. So you have to break it down to the two, thesis and antithesis, before you get it broken down far enough to actually have something in your mind that is truthful and constructive, and know something else that is not constructive and not truthful and therefore not useful. Now, the practicality of this is, if we really realize that the antisocial personalities of this world are caused by their environment and what the factors are in their environment that cause them, we might one day nearly get to the point where we have no people in the world like Adolf Hitler and Stalin and what have you. And wouldn't the world be a better place?
Yes, most definitely.
But also, wouldn't the world be a better place if we had one unified field equation that would explain all of physics? And the way you get that is you realize that the particle of energy that Einstein got the Nobel Prize for is an untrue particle of energy. And all you have to do is read my books to understand where Einstein went wrong. Einstein was not a great mathematician. So when he got I think another Nobel Prize for recognizing the quantum theory of things, where quanta is a certain specified Platonist unit, so that he actually proved that mathematics in calculus is imaginary mathematics, but mathematics that has Platonist forms, like the true particle of energy, has a definite quantity associated with it. He would have had the unified field equation, and he would have understood physics a lot better if he knew about the true particle of energy being Planck's constant expressed as energy, not Planck's constant times the frequency of light, which showed the fallacy of trying to associate everything with time. And that's what you do in calculus.
The book is a fascinating read. What's Your Analysis Diagnosis? Truth or Fantasy? An Essay on Human Perception. The author is Dr. Frank Elbert Davis III. The book's available at Dorrance Bookstore. A minute or two left in the program. Where did this interest come on your part? Obviously, you read the book, you listen to you talk, you sense the passion, the research, all of the hundreds, thousands of hours that you put into research. Where did this interest come from for you?
Well, if you've ever known narcissistic personalities, and certainly you've known them in literature, because they're the most famous people that are written about.
Yes.
They are really colorful people. They seem almost childlike in their perception of the world, and but they're extremely self-defeating. So you might imagine yourself, or you could write a book about falling in love with a narcissistic personality and really liking them, and they have many qualities, positive qualities as well as their negative qualities, and they may even end your relationship in the novel, or in real life. They might end the relationship simply because they misperceive you as something that you are not. In one case, a woman, and this comes from Annie Reich's work, women often choose their objects based upon some narcissistic fantasy, like, oh, if my husband is a doctor, he will have unlimited wealth, and I can spend money without any thought for the consequences.
That, yes.
Well, if you marry somebody that has that fantasy and she can't spend as much as she wants to, she may divorce you even though you provide a tremendous living for her, but you don't live up to her over-idealized expectations of you.
Interesting.
And so then, and if you have children together, she can take your child with her. And then if her child learns to live in her mother's fantasy world, because according to the Stockholm Syndrome, she has to, then your child acquires that fantasy world belief and will then misperceive you the same way her mother did, or his mother did. And he will dislike you for the same reason that his mother divorced you, believing that you do not love him or her because you do not live up to that unrealistic expectation. And then you find that your child has this very unpleasant disorder, and it's a personality disorder, where they're unhappy because of unrealistic expectations, and they don't meet real life challenges because they are not living in the real world. Their superego structure becomes the fantasy world of unlimited brilliance.
This is a fascinating discussion, and as always...
I'm sorry, Rick. Unlimited brilliance, but in this case, their fantasy world becomes the fantasy world of unlimited wealth through a parent
Right.
or another love object.
It is just a really intriguing, fascinating topic. The book is What's Your Analysis Diagnosis, Truth or Fantasy, an essay on human perception. Our guest on the program has been Dr. Frank Elbert Davis III. The book's available at DorranceBookstore.com. Dorrance is DORRANCE. You can link on directly at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Dr. Davis, it is always a pleasure to have you with us on the program. Thank you so much for being with us on the program today. Excellent book, and look forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I hope your listeners will either buy this book or go to their library and read it. I think they'll get some insights that maybe the whole world doesn't have yet.
And will be a better place for it. Again, the book is called What's Your Analysis Diagnosis, Truth or Fantasy? An essay on human perception. The author is Dr. Frank Elbert Davis III. All the information available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Stay tuned. We're coming right back after these important messages. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us.